am Reverend Wesley A. Johnson II of the CARES Ministry at Palmer Theological Seminary. And today I am joined by Dr. Tokunbo Adelekan. He is a scholar, a professor, and a pastor. You'll get a chance to hear more about who he is, his story, and his journey. Today, we'll be talking about the legacy and the work of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We have some questions, and this really is just a fireside chat. So we have some things prepared, but we're going to trust the Spirit to lead us in the direction that the Spirit decides for us to go. And so I just want to say, Dr. Adelekan, as I look at my notes here, I want to make sure that I am on point. Dr. King said this on one occasion: intelligence plus character, that is the goal of true education. And so I'm honored that you are here with us today because I think you fit that description. So let me just tell you a little bit about who Dr. Adelekan is, and then we'll jump into some conversation. Is that okay?
Oh boy, here we go.
Here we go. Here we go. Dr. Tokunbo Adelekan is a pastor and an associate professor of theology and ethics at Palmer Theological Seminary, a dynamic scholar, preacher, and teacher, leader in urban theology. His works include A Charge to Keep and The Art of Joseph, explore innovative ways to remission the church. Known for his cultural, relevant approaches to ministry, he has guided communities worldwide in embracing sacrificial living and innovative worship. Dr. Adelekan resides in Dayton, Ohio with his wife, Dr. Adelekan, and their 3 children. Dr. Adelekan, let me just say thank you for joining us today. To start, you could share your personal journey that led you to explore theology, ethics, and the role of the church in an urban context, particularly in light of Dr. King's mission, and anything else you would like to share with us as we begin.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. It's great to be part of the conversation in such sacred space, Palmer Theological Seminary, and to recover and relive and recast the rich legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King, who I consider to be perhaps the greatest American that ever lived. I was born in the late 60s. I'm a child of funk and soul.
Yeah.
My mother is Catholic. She's African American. My father is Yoruba, West African extraction. My father was part of the intelligentsia that swerved from going to school in England to the United States after the Great War, World War II. And so my father came to this area, actually, Pennsylvania, did some work at Lincoln, wound up at Ohio State.
Oh, wow.
Where he found this co-ed by the name of Patricia. And they started their romance in the late 50s, early 60s. I say that because my father is Church of England. He's Anglican. My mother's Catholic. My father's West African, right? My mother is from West Columbus.
Wow.
My father is African. My mother is African American, right? African colonial subject, African American double colonial subject, right? My mother dreams in English. My father dreams in Yoruba. I'm neither Church of England or Catholic. I'm freewheeling Baptist from Pentecostal extraction who believes in the holy dance and all of that.
Yes, sir.
And so I say that to say that I was born in Connecticut, late 60s. So in many ways, I was born at the convergence of not just African and African American culture, but I was born at several turning points. Born the turning point between civil rights and Black power, between funk and soul, right? And when America was opening up its doors to new folk coming in and taking over the sectors of society, as well as the anti-colonial struggles around the world. So I see the time of my birth is very complicated, right, but very rich. And my life is to try to give honor to, first of all, God, secondly, my parents. But I was born actually a year and a week after the death of Martin Luther King.
Wow.
And I've always seen my life as trying to live out prismatically the legacies of Martin, Malcolm, and Medgar on the one hand, and then also John F. Kennedy and Robert Kennedy.
Mm.
And you notice that all of those five
Yeah.
were assassinated
Mm-hmm.
in the 60s,
Mm-hmm.
in the tumult, in the tempest of America trying to redefine itself
Mm-hmm.
and reimagine itself.
Mm-hmm.
And, it has been said poetically that Martin was in Memphis, Medgar in Mississippi, and Malcolm in Manhattan.
Mm-hmm.
But the reason why I also lift up Robert F. Kennedy and John F. Kennedy is because, given their being embedded within the American political system, they had enough vision to understand as Catholics,
Yeah.
and as coming from complicated Irish backgrounds themselves, the need to open up the playing field for other voices.
That's right.
So at the end of the day, my legacy to God, to my parents and family, and then also to King, or my contributions, or the way in which I engage these theaters, is simply to say that we want to lift every voice. And because every voice needs to be counted. And so as a preacher, as a teacher, as an academic, I try to live my life along those lines. And that's what I'm committed to. So it's great to be here, part of this conversation.
I am so glad you're here, my brother, and I've been looking forward to this conversation. Let me ask you a question, and we can go anywhere the Spirit leads us in this question. As I think about African wisdom and Dr. King's vision, you've written about the importance of African wisdom in shaping ethical frameworks.
Absolutely.
How do you see Dr. King's teachings on justice, equality, and nonviolence intersecting with traditional African proverbs? That's one. Second to that is, what relevance does the connection have for contemporary ministry leaders?
Great. The question of Dr. King's Afrocentric moral imagination is, I think, an area that is underexplored and underinvestigated. When we look at the centrality of African culture and we compare them to the bedrock of Dr. King's project, I think you see profound similarities.
For sure.
The Africans say, what goes around comes around. The Africans say that a child a grandmother sitting down on a tree stump can see further than a child in a tree. The Africans say just because a log is sitting in the water does not make it a crocodile. The Africans saw the eagle cleaning out its own anal cavity and said that wisdom is self-cleansing. So if you take one, for example, pregnant African proverb that is probably seen throughout the belly of West Africa in some version or another, right? That what goes around comes around.
Yes, sir.
Now you connect that to Dr. King's understanding of the interrelatedness of all life.
Yeah.
That we're not simply here to exploit, to oppress nature, reality, time. That we're here to dwell in harmony, to wrestle, yes, with conflict in nature, but also to nestle within nature and with others, and so on and so forth, and to get along with the universe, with what he called the house that we live in. And so you see that notion of individuality and commonality in the sense of how both the African American tradition embodied by King and the African tradition, are harmonious with human beings and with nature. So that's one. The other thing that I think is more ethical in structure is in how Dr. King, in a way, as an Afro-Protestant, as a Baptist preacher, how his theology, if you will, reflects the life, the buoyancy, the vitality, right, of existence. And what I mean by that is King was always emerging. The psalmist talks about rivers that make glad the city of God. Well, African Americans talk about, I've known rivers. There's no way you can talk about Africa without talking about River Benue, River Niger, River Nile. So what does the river mean? The river itself, right, speaks to life itself, the journey of life, but also speaks to what feeds life, right? And so when you think about King in this way, you think about King's ever-emerging consciousness. King never got to the place where he thought he knew it all. The universe is never ending. God is always teaching. Bill Dixon got and so when you look at the African wisdom and African mental constitution, the African imagination, and you look at King, you understand that King was constantly opening himself, growing from African American culture. Now, also, your question also shows that there is less of a break between Africans and African Americans than we think.
Yeah.
That
yeah.
I am one of those scholars that seek to look for the continuity and not the breaking, right? That the deep sense of God in both cultures, the deep sense of family, the rhythmic tonality of our religion, oral culture, the search for wisdom, sacrifice, compassion, on and on and on. And so I think that you have this richness in Dr. King. I think the final thing I would say about Dr. King, in terms of his project and what you find in, I think this goes to the second part of the question, what you find in African wisdom, what I call the three, it's a tripartite reality that I don't think you can understand African peoples without. Number one is a critical and curious consciousness, a need to discover the world, but not necessarily control the world. So that informs scholarship, that informs search for knowledge, that informs seeking wisdom, that informs James 1 in the New Testament. If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask God, who gives to all men liberally and without wisdom. So that critical, curious consciousness. The second thing that you find both in the African moral mentality as well as in Dr. King, again, as the exemplar of the African American Christian consciousness, is what I would call consecrated courage.
Say more.
Courage is how we get over. Courage is, were you there when they crucified my Lord? Courage is, tell, O Pharaoh, let my people go. Courage is what fed the ring shout, the foot stomping, the preaching in African American slavery. Courage is what allowed us to forget the people that painted on our backs and branded us. But courage is also what allows us to tell no, say no to the devil and say no to evil. But it has to be consecrated. So it is fine for somebody to have courage, but the crossness, that is to say, the Christian character of courage says, I have so much courage that what my flesh is saying I should do to you in revenge and retaliation, what you've done to me, I'm going to consecrate it. And I'm going to bear my cross. And I'm going to go the extra mile. And I say that to say that when you look at the African moral mentality and you look at King especially, that King comes from a tradition of people, Dr. Johnson, that never developed an army of terror in North America because of the grace and the forgiveness. King embodied nonviolence because he came from a people of nonviolence. Not to say that Malcolm does not have a point, but we still need to understand that these are people that lived through terror, but decided to use the terror against Jesus on the cross, transmute that into preaching, praise, and prayer to say, you know what, I'm going to keep my sanity because I don't have to become like the people. I don't have to embody the callousness and monstrosity of the people that did this to me. And so it has to be consecrated compassion. In the words of James Cone, however, we have to be cautious because sometimes we've not sought revenge and retaliation on those that have enacted that on us, but we've sublimated it and we've injured each other. Black on black crime. Sometimes how black men treat black women and children and vice versa. What we do in churches. So we have this pain, and because we don't transmute it to the right place, we don't sublimate it, we tend to what? Reenact this pain and violence on one another.
Self-injurious behavior.
Absolutely. Right. And then thirdly, you know, this curious and critical consciousness is the first one. The second one is consecrated courage. And the third one is what I call cross-like compassion. At the end of the day, we are a people that embody and epitomize a caravan of love. In slavery, there was no homelessness. In slavery, people were not checking out on drugs. My Harvard professor, Eugene Rivers, would say this generation, he said this in the 80s, in the height of gangster, he said this generation of African Americans will be declared ineligible for slavery. As if to say you have to qualify to be a slave. And an enslaved African. They require a certain level of virtue, excellence, character, courage, intelligence to even survive from day to day. And then to say, I'm going to give birth.
would be disqualified.
They would be disqualified because when they deal with trauma, when they deal with burdens, what do? They take it out on one another.
Yes.
They run to the bar. Not that that's, we're not judging that, right? Or they go to drugs. They say, no. What did these people do? They found a way to love against the enemy. They found a way to hold on to somebody else's time. They found a way that even if they only had a slice or a speck of bread, a corner to leave it, there was somebody else that was going to be fed. Nobody was in the homeless, out of doors, if you will, out of doors with no blanket. So they seemed to be able to make room. They had cross-like compassion. So much so that when we look at the slave narratives, and I thank God for my professor, Henry Louis Gates, and also Kwame Appiah for chronicling many of the slave narratives outside of Frederick Douglass and Linda Brett that we know about, that many of them, even when the Euro-American mother did not put their child on the breast, African-American mothers in slavery would take a Euro-American child and put their physical child on one. Oftentimes, that child that they had was a lighter color. Right? And that's why we have to check racism, because it's one thing to oppress somebody in the daytime, and the nighttime you find a way to go into somebody else's bedroom. That's why you have so many shades of African Americans. But the bottom line is you have this maternal love that we fed people and sang to people and danced for people and built people's civilizations and nations and neighborhoods in slavery, 244 years. That the grand economic wealth of this country built on the backs and the genius and the intelligence. Absolutely. And so I just wanted to lay that out there as to answer that question of what are the continuities and commonalities between the tradition King embodies in African spiritual. So there's another question that you had.
Yeah, there's so many sub-points from that.
Absolutely.
I wish we had time.
Absolutely.
Maybe we have to revisit this. But I'd love to ask you around the idea of remissioning the urban church as a prophetic voice.
Absolutely.
And so here's my question. In a charge to keep, you discuss remissioning.
Absolutely.
The urban church. Dr. King's vision of the church, or for the church, was one of justice and activism. And I wish we had time to unpack the Hebrew meaning of the word justice as a social construct. But how can today's urban church leaders maintain that prophetic voice of activism while facing challenges like political polarization and social injustice?
Absolutely. So what I would do is that I would borrow a leaf from the notebook of critical consciousness, of consecrated courage, and of cross-like compassion. And what I would say is that if you were to combine those three, there are many, as I indicated earlier, underexplored and therefore underdeveloped areas of King's thought that I think that we can recover. One of the areas of King's thought is King's holistic vision, which accents and acknowledges the sort of biblical Hebraic understanding of justice, which means wholeness, not just in persons, but in whole communities. One of the things that I think we need to do is we need to recover a Hebraic, and I would argue also a New Testament understanding of justice in the community. And I think there is an element of King that critiques modern American Western Protestantism. And that is, I think, enshrined in his understanding of Christology. Traditionally, American Protestants, including the Black church, understand salvation as alienation from God. When we look at what happened, we understand, sin as alienation from God, and salvation as reunification or reconciliation with God. What I think King teaches us is that salvation must be understood not in terms of one dimension or dynamic, but in terms of four. And I think he comes from a tradition that allows us to reread Genesis. That in Genesis, in terms of the disobedience, you find four layers or four dimensions of alienation. You find first the alienation from God, but you also find Adam, humanity, being alienated from itself. You find Adam being alienated from the other, as in Eve. You also find Adam being alienated from nature, because now you have to labor and you have to work for what you have. Right. So what happens is, because we misread the Old Testament, it means that we project an idea, a truncated idea of salvation onto what Jesus did. And so people now see my salvation as me just coming to the Lord, not understanding that what Jesus represents is an idea of salvation that says, yes, I need to be reconciled to God, but also to my neighbor, right? Also to myself, and also to nature. And so what King does is that he gives us a program with the beloved community based on the cross, right? That allows us to reconcile to God, to myself, to the neighbor, and to nature. And so you have a fuller understanding of biblical justice with King. And I think many folk in the Black church, many people who are social justice people, need to understand that and not see social justice as an aberration or secondary. But I think it goes deeper than that, my brother. And this is what I think King left with us. As I said earlier, King was a student. And there's no way that you can talk about the project of King without understanding chapters. King died at 39 years old. He wasn't even 40. When he died, there was less than $400 in his bank account. When he died, 55% of Black people were not in support of what he was doing.
That's right.
When he died, he was no longer seen as the establishment theologian. He was running out of money. He was running out of support. In fact, the movement itself was fragmenting. But why? Because many people around King, and this is a lesson for all of us, did not understand his constant emergence. King was not just a student in terms of an intellect that footnoted people or that drew from ideas in textbooks. King was an observer of cultural, geographic, political, and economic realities around the world. What can preachers do to recover the legacy? Let us continue to run with the baton of what King left. For example, here's a critical idea. Oftentimes we see the enemy, we construe the enemy, or we imagine the enemy as white supremacy. I think if we look at King, there are at least 4 or 5 other pathways King was trying to get us to understand. In terms of parochialism,
say more.
Within, I would say, African American circles. So it's not that King wanted to demystify or simply dismiss the need for us, right, to wrestle with white supremacy. But let's look at King at a deeper level. There were some other phobias, and there was also provincialities or provincialisms that he was working on. And I'll name a couple. First, King worked against tribal denominationalism. If we watch King was willing to work with Catholics, Anglicans, Pentecostals, and so on and so forth, in order to generate a worldwide movement. Of course, the foregrounded Black folk. One of the things that hurts the Black church is our heightened tribal denominationalism. That person is Lutheran, I don't want to hang with, oh, they're Pentecostals, right? And so we deprivilege ourselves that way. Another area is the ways in which Dr. King was global. He was there when Kwame Nkrumah was enshrined as president. He was in Nigeria. He was in Ghana. He went to Jamaica a lot. There's a way in which we, people of African descent, see each other as people to be afraid of. That's what's going on with the Haitian community today. So even among the islands, Haitians are seen a particular way. African Americans decide that they don't want to go along with Ghanaians. Ghanaians say they don't want to get along with Nigerians. So there's a way in which King helped us with cultural apartheid, denominational apartheid. King also, and this is one of the things I love about King, every 3 or 4 years, there was a new group of lieutenants that King decided.
That's right. That's right.
Many Black preachers only hang out with folk in their generation. They don't know how to reach up to the elders, and they don't know how to reach down to younger folk. There is a deep cross-generational, intergenerational divide in our communities. In the church, and how we understand the world. Folk don't want to hang out, folk don't want to learn. So you find the denominational one, you find the cross-cultural one, you find the generational. I think also we have to look at our aesthetic expressions. King understood the power of music.
Mm-hmm.
We look at the ways in which music
Mm-hmm.
and song,
Mm-hmm.
praise,
Mm-hmm.
interface with preaching
Mm-hmm.
in the movement.
Mm-hmm.
I ain't gonna let nobody
Turn me around.
turn me around.
Mm-hmm.
You have a great sonorous voice, my brother. It says, walk together, children.
Mm-hmm.
Don't you get weary. And King was able to keep up with the changing dynamics of music. Where would the civil rights be without James Brown?
Mm-hmm.
And why is that so important? Because when we track the music
Mm-hmm.
of our people, we can find the sustenance to become a greater army for justice to face the foes outside. What am I saying? That the enemy is not just beyond blackness. We have to find a way to develop a greater army of disciples inside by working across denominational lines, across cultural lines, across generational lines to fortify the army that will be strong enough to fight the supremacist and capitalist structures outside. One of the tragedies of the Black Lives Movement, it was not generated and suffused by the Black church. Right? So there's a way in which King's imagination or project forces us to recover internal resources in order for us to generate external, if you will, programs and proposals to fight off the facts. And I think this showed up in all of these divides around the last election. Wow. So we have to be greater soldiers. We hear about the public king, but the confessional king, the disciple-making king, also needs to be recovered, because you have to be able to transmit this knowledge cross-generationally and therefore heal what's going on in our families, in our communities, in order to fight the foes outside. And I think this is a grand moment for
Wow. Wow. And I think the timing couldn't be more in demand than now, for sure. We can stay right there for a long, long time. I'm going to ask you a question about legacy and political divide.
Okay.
Dr. King's work was deeply rooted in the Christian tradition, as we know, and it called to love and service to others. In today's divide, political climate, how can churches honor Dr. King's legacy of unity and compassion in their local communities, especially with the recent election of a president whose values seem starkly different than the ones that we're talking about now?
Absolutely. Let me frame my response in the form of a narrative.
Yes.
Okay. The idea and the reality of white supremacy is something that cannot be dismissed. We've lived with that reality for 400 plus years.
Yeah.
What King did was develop the moral tissues and the psychological bonds of community based on the best of the Black church and the Black progressive tradition in order to, if you will, hold back and combat the fangs of white supremacy. The argument is, without an internal army of curiosity, critical intelligence, consecrated compassion, right? Consecrated current compassion, you do not have the wherewithal. And what has happened is the realities of the broader nation are exposing the inadequacies, if you will, right, of what has happened within African American. Yeah. I'll give you a couple, because this is sort of where I sort of do my work.
Yeah.
Dr. King understood, for example, depression, trauma at a deep level. There were times in which Dr. King did not want to get out of bed. And they would have to call Mahalia Jackson to come and sing Precious Lord. That's how deeply he was involved in the movement. So there was a sense of musicality that helped him with depression. There's a way in which we need to recover that tradition. That tradition also dovetails into some other things. Dr. King also had a deep understanding of class consciousness, not just in regards to white conservatives and liberals, but inside the Black community itself. a lot of what created depression for King was the fact that he tried to rally the resources within his community, right? That opposed him privately and publicly. Yeah. Right? That's why 55% of black folk did not support King. What do I mean by that? Even within the National Baptist Convention, J.H. Jackson refused to allow King room to play. Yeah. I'm a member of Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity. Dr. King would go to the Alphas and tell the Alphas that at the Alpha annual convention that they would spend more money on liquor than give to the NAACP. Class consciousness within the black community. He would say to preachers that we would care more about the base on our Cadillac than the spiritual base of our compassion for people. And so the point I'm making, Dr. King's approach was dialectical. He was critiquing white supremacy and class consciousness and economic oppression. But he was also critiquing the ways in which the black middle class, the talented 10, had oftentimes veered away from their historical commission based on Du Bois and were participating, if you will, co-signing the oppression of white folk. So Dr. King's critique was dialectic. To what degree is the black middle class, to what degree is the black preacher, to what degree is the black scholar, to what degree are we going to sacrifice, develop the organic potential and connections to rally the people and go beyond what was going on Sunday? Now to the church. So because of what happened in integration, now you have at least two black Americans. Dr. King talked about two Americas. But right after Dr. King, not only do you have two Americas, you have two black Americas, because now you have suburbs. Even in this area, you got people moving not just out to Germantown and Mount Airy and St. David's, right? But you got people moving out to New Jersey. Well, what's going on in North Philadelphia? What's going on in 42nd and Girard? What's going on 17th and Ruskin? And so what happens is you have the avalanche of drugs that come in. So what happens is you got black middle class folk that are still going to the historic churches in Harlem, in Brooklyn, in West Philadelphia, and West Dayton. But what was happening? They do not have ongoing organic connections to the people on the ground. Hence the school system, hence the drugs. And it's very hard for you to have a liberation movement if you don't live with the people that are suffering. So the task is, yes, you want your child in a good school. Yes, you need to live in a good neighborhood, but at the same time, what kind of resources, what kind of ideas, what kind of connection, what kind of time are you spending in the community develop? And that is why across the board, from LA to Chicago to Detroit, even in places like Houston, they're closing down the great black worship houses in the 60s.
Yes, sir.
And so what I'm arguing is that King, he preserved the critique of racial capitalism, militarism, and white supremacy. But at the same time, he was challenging brothers and sisters, black and brown, to become more global in their consciousness, not to suffer from historical amnesia, which many Americans do, and do not allow folk to divide you from the people that you're called to fight for. And so what is the goal of the black church? The goal of the black church, I would argue, is first and foremost, right, that the reason why you study King, we are the quick, right? We study the dead in order to bequeath something to the young. So the reason why I'm studying Dr. King is I'm trying to find something to connect to the young people, because without that new army, there's no way that you're going to deal with neoconservatives. There's no way you're going to deal with Project 2025. And that also means that we must submit ourselves to their new styles of learning, to their new brilliance, to the ways in which they work with hip hop and technology and social media, and not decry it and denounce it, but find a way to explore it with them. Absolutely. And this is one of the things I think Dr. King was so rich with in terms of his ability to connect with generational realities. This is what I mean by that. That when King started, he was 26 when he started the Montgomery movement. His mentors were people like Shuttlesworth. Colleagues were people like Abernathy. But every 3 or 4 years, not only do you have Abernathy, you have a Hosea Williams. Not only do you have Hosea Williams, you have C.T. Vivian. Not only do you have C.T. Vivian, you have Andrew Young. It's getting younger and younger. Not only do you have Andrew Young, you have James Lovell, you have Bob Moses. And then after that group went away, now you have the people in SNCC. You got H. Rap Brown, you got Stokely Martin. So King is always evolving. King is always working with the Diana Nashes, right? And so the question from Tokunbo is, how do I keep on, without disrespecting the elders, how do I keep on hanging out with the younger generation? What is this Super Bowl genius? What does he talk about? What is Kendrick Lamar talking about? What is he signifying? Right? When he says, ain't not like us.
Not like us.
This is a brother here that is critiquing another brown brother from Canada who he thinks, right, is what? What is he doing? He's capitalizing on white supremacy in capitalist America to exploit soul music. He's not really grounded. I told my child, I said, I don't like, and I'm just going to be vulnerable for a minute. Please. I talk to my children. I told you I'm double hyphenated. My children are quadruple hyphenated because their mother is from Grenada. So I said, I'm not sure I understand what Kendrick Lamar is talking about. My son is a student here, plays soccer here, right? I said, what is he talking about? I said, because I don't like the fact that he say not like us, because I spent all my life trying to bring together black and brown people from around the world, Africa, the diaspora, right? The Caribbean and African Americans. But I don't want him to work this fragmentation. I don't want him to be so parochial as an African American. And they say, no, Dad. He said, we're Nigerian too. He said, but he's making a point. He's saying we don't need cultural theft from people that look like us. We don't need a Canadian, right, that is in blackface, even though he's brown, really hanging out with people that don't look like us. But when he needs money, he knows how to get to Atlanta. That's what the lyrics are about. When he needs money, he knows how to connect to. So he says, now, Kendrick Lamar has enough courage, curiosity, right, and cross-like compassion to say, brother, we see what you're doing. What you're really doing is you're really a gangster. That's what he's saying to Drake. You're really a gangster. And I want that conversation to continue. I think there should be a rapprochement, but we're going to see what's happening on the Super Bowl, because Kendrick, he's coming out, and he may do some signifying around that. But you see where the tensions are. But my children are saying, they're helping me understand, because see, I am a Sugar Hill gang. Right? I am Grandmaster Mel Mel.
There you go.
Back in the day, our parents used to take care of us. Looking at them now, they even blink and scared. Sorry, that's Biggie. Back in the state, Grandmaster Flash would say, a child is born with no state of mind, blind to the ways of mankind. God is smiling on you, but he's frowning too. But Biggie now, years later, would say, back in the day, our parents used to take care of us. Looking at them now, they ain't instead of critiquing, you know what I'm saying, critiquing that whole drug thing, right? What happened to the summertime cookout? Every time I look around, the brothers getting took out. Right? So they're helping me understand. Now the reason why I'm going on like this, and I'll say this and I'll pause, is we have to recover some things before we can protest. Otherwise, we're going into the gunfight with a toothpick. Right? And one of the grand mistakes that the church made, the generation before me, my generation especially, is that for the first time, in my view, in my reading of the 400 or 500 years of African American history, we know 1619 is the totemic date since we've been here. For the first time, a generation of African Americans rejected the art form, the musical, lyrical art form of the generation coming behind. And when you reject their art form, what you're really saying to them, especially in a climate in which many of you have moved out to the vanilla suburbs, you're saying to them that they are less than. So it was a way in which we told the next generation that they were inferior without putting it in newspaper or putting it in social media. And so what happened is you had a donut, you had a hole in the inner city. And then what happened was some other people saw the brilliance, the curiosity, the temerity, the genius, the creativity, the innovation, the improvisation of this cultural art form known as hip hop. And they turned it and corrupted it into gangster rap.
Exploited it.
But the opportunity was for the church. But the church said, we don't want that. What would have happened if you could have combined the genius of James Cone with the brilliance of Grandmaster Flash? What would have happened if you could have gotten Cornel West and you could have gotten Emily Towns to sit with Biggie Small and Tupac? What would have happened today if we can get Dr. Wesley Johnson to have a conversation with Kendrick Lamar? And help him with what would have happened if you could bring the Sister Soldier with Michael Eric Dyson, with Jackie McCullough, with Jeremiah Wright and Johnny the Youngblood, if you could get them to have conversation, and we didn't push them out and say because it's not gospel music, but found a way to do some spoken word and look at Jesus and James Brown. You see, and come up with a new form of the Psalms using hip hop. Consecrate the lyrics.
And stop demonizing.
The culture I'm from. And here's the critique. It would be one thing if hip hop died, but hip hop has now become not just an international but a global phenomenon where folk are singing hip hop, Burna Boy in Nigeria, in Latin America, in China, that have taken on, and the black church is still looking with his like a deer in front of headlights. You see the cultural moment that we missed. Now there are still positive forms of hip hop. Not everything is gangster rap.
Sure.
But gangster rap oftentimes predominates. And overdetermines which way hip hop is going. That's why that's why we have to link up with these great voices, KRS-One. You see, we have to link up with these words and say, well, how do we bring you into the church? You know, some shows are still struggling with drums in the church or dancing in the church. And we can go on and on about that. But if we look at it, one of the mistakes that we've made is we have, if you will, many of us have taken on a Western understanding of the faith, even in rhapsodic and musical forms. And unless you're singing a certain kind of music, then it's not Christ-like music. It took my father, it took some wrestling with my own father to understand this. My father said that Church of England growing up, he went to colonial schools, Government College Ibadan, Nigeria, one of the seminal schools for young black men back in the day, still today. And he said one of the things that they taught us was that as Anglicans, that worship is from the waist up. So he said the Anglicans, even in Africa, could have made greater inroads. Right? The church in Africa, Catholics could have made greater inroads if they understood African cultural, physical, and kinetic sensibilities. So they were trying to make Africans into dark-skinned Europeans rather than understanding the art forms that God had given to Africa. He said, so many of the churches that force us to worship from the waist up and sing with an open hymnal, they missed a great move in missiology and evangelism. He said, but when Africans were able to come and dance their way into the church, the body swing, the foot stomping, the singing, and worship with their entire beings, those churches, and that's why you have Pentecostalism in Africa today, and so on and so forth, churches, African Christianity, so on and so forth, merging with new forms of charismatic religion. They have begun to embrace Christianity in new ways. So it's up to, again, this is another contribution of Kim. You have to study the culture that you're entering into in terms of enculturation and acculturation. We've said a lot, but you're picking a lot of bones in my body, sir.
Oh my goodness. I think there's so many points you've made that we can rest right there. I mean, and literally that it takes on a whole nother conversation. But I want to keep moving.
Yes, sir.
I want to keep moving.
Yes, sir.
I'm thrown by the conversation around music. I am a hip hop fan, absolutely like you, born in similar times. So understand the emergence of hip hop. Understand its genesis, particularly here. Certainly, we can start tracing hip hop back beyond these shores.
Absolutely,
right?
Very good.
But
wax eloquent.
We certainly can do that. And as a matter of fact, my pastor, Dr. Willie Wilson, the emeritus at Union Temple Baptist Church, did a presentation or invited a guest to do a presentation that literally traced the drum beat in go-go music, which is native to DC, to the drum beat on the African continent.
Wow.
And according to that presentation, there's a hit that's made that no musical scholar has ever been able to define.
Wow.
But you see it here in DC, which is what makes go-go, and you see it on the continent.
Amazing.
And it is a power that resonates. It is something deeply profound and spiritual. And to your point, if we were ever able to capture the power, the influence, the cultural uniqueness that makes a group of people who they are, in light of their own narrative and their own journey.
Absolutely.
I'm processing in real time because I recognize that we have missed an opportunity, and it wasn't lost on me that this is a generation that has not embraced the music of the previous or the current generation.
Emerson said, imitation is suicide. You have to love yourself before you can look out and love others. We missed a major cultural moment, and we're paying for it dearly.
Yeah.
And some of it was circumstantial and because of conditions of what we had to do with integration, but some of it was self-conscious, denial of what God had given us. What Du Bois would call the gifts of Black folk.
Yes. Yep.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there's so much richness out there. We're just at the surface. We've not fully mined these developments. But my hope is with these younger people, because with the younger people, there's a way in which, my daughter was my daughter for New Year's went to a party in Manhattan that was both they had Burna Boy on the one hand and they had Kendrick on the other hand. So there's a way in which with the younger generations, especially on our college campuses, there's a grander openness to these productions from the islands, right? From the African continent and what African Americans have to bring to bear. And they flow, and the DJs are just able, just like the drummer and the DJ, and the DJ and the drummer, they're able to flow in between these musical styles and art forms and very creative. And
I'm getting an opportunity to experience that firsthand with our children as well.
Amen.
So my wife is Caribbean, full blood Jamaican.
There you go. I knew that. My brother. I knew that you had that Caribbean in you somewhere. Yes, sir.
And so I get an opportunity to hear that with my children's music, see their expression.
Wow.
A few of them are musical. And make their own music. And so I get an opportunity to kind of witness that firsthand and the consciousness behind their thinking.
Wow.
Yeah. How they arrive at their presentations.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's
there's a rhythm.
Yeah, man.
God is still working. Look at God's intergenerational connections.
Yeah.
And that's what we have to, I think, recover in more spaces.
For sure.
You're modeling that.
For sure. Well, Doc, why don't we take a pause?
Okay.
And we'll come back in just a few moments, and we'll continue this rich conversation. Stay tuned. Don't go anywhere.
Thank you.
Peace and blessings.